who really runs the White House? The bombshell book claiming a secret inner circle controlled America. Now, for decades, Americans have assumed that the most powerful government in the world operates through institutions. The president makes decisions. We know that very clear from the old school books. Cabinet members advises. Military leaders assess risk. Congress provides oversight. And the system moves so on and so forth forward. But if that wasn't what was happening behind the closed doors, what was really happening? What if some of the most important decisions affecting the global security, wars, diplomacy, and America's future were not being debated by a broad team of senior officials? What if they were being made by a tiny group of insiders operating in extraordinary secrecy? So that is the explosive claim at the center of a new book by veteran journalists Maggie, Haberman, and Jonathan Swan. Now, their book paints a picture of an administration where power was concentrated into an exceptionally small circle around Donald Trump. And if their reporting is accurate, the implications are enormous, because this isn't merely a story about personalities here. It is a story all about power, about who actually makes decisions here and how the US is being run, and about whether the traditional structure of the government were being bypassed or not. So according to the authors, the White House operated with a level of secrecy that surpassed even experienced government officials. Now think about that. In interviews discussing their reporting, Jonathan Swan describes a very clear thing, what he called a small decision-making group. Not dozens of people right here, not a large national security apparatus. No, he's not talking about that. But according to Swan, roughly 5 or 6 key individuals alongside Donald Trump himself. That claim immediately raises probably a fundamental question right here. Who was inside the room here? And perhaps more importantly, who wasn't inside the room? So the book alleges that during critical decisions regarding Iran, some cabinet officials were excluded from the key conversation, right? Among those reportedly absent were Treasury Secretary and Energy Secretary. Now, this is significant. The Treasury Department plays a central role in sanctions, financial pressures, and economic strategy. So the Department of Energy oversees critical nuclear expertise and energy security concerns. Now, traditionally, both could expected probably to contribute to discussion involving a major Middle East crisis. Yet, according to the report, these officials were not participating in some of the most sensitive conversation. Now, if true, that suggests decision-making was occurring within an unusually narrow circle. Then comes perhaps the most dramatic allegation. The authors reports that a final high-level meeting took place in February 26 before coordinated by US-Israel military operation against Iran. According to the book, this gathering represented one of the final stages of deliberation before action. So the significance is not simply the meeting itself. The government holds high-level meetings all the time. That's normal. So the significance is Alice's secrecy surrounding the process. The authors probably they argued that the key decisions were increasingly concentrated among the selected group of trusted insiders. So this is where a title of the book becomes very important: regime change. Not merely referring to the foreign policy, no, I'm not talking about that, but suggesting a transformation in how presidential power was exercised inside White House. So the authors use the phrase imperial presidency. The phrase has a long history in American politics. It refers to a presidency that accumulates extraordinary authority and increasingly dominates institutions that were designed to share power. So critics of strong executive power have used the term for presidents from both political parties. Now, the concern is always the same here. When decision-making becomes concentrated, transparency decreases instantly. Accountability becomes very hard, much harder, and fewer voices are being involved in shaping major national decisions. Now, supporters of strong executive leaderships, however, argue something very different if you pay attention on that. They contend that president must sometimes act super quickly, that large bureaucracies can slow decision making, and that excessive consultation can create paralysis during crisis, and that decisive leadership is often necessary when national security is at high stake. So this debate is not new. It has existed throughout American history. But what makes the allegation in this book is so controversial is the scale of contradiction described. Because if only a handful of individuals were involved in shaping some of the most consequential decisions, then question naturally follows here, right? Were alternatives viewpoint adequately considered or not? or probably were experts fully consulted, or were institutional safeguards functioning as intended, or had power become heavily centralized around personal trust and loyalty. So the authors say their conclusion based on extensive reporting right here. So according to discussions surrounding the book, their work involved interviews with hundreds of sources and individuals familiar with internal deliberation. Haberman and Swan are among the most prominent political reporters in Washington. So their supporters argue that they have spent years of cultivating sources and documenting internal White House dynamics. Think of that for a second. Critics, however, point out that books based on anonymous sources can be difficult for the public to independently verify, and they argue that accounts from unnamed officials should be approached carefully and critically. So that is an important point right there. A responsible analysis requires separating verified facts from reported allegation, and the existence of this book is a fact. The author's reporting is real, and the interviews are real, but many of probably the specific claims rely on sources that readers cannot directly examine for themselves here. So that does not mean the reporting is false or fake, no, nor does it automatically make it true. I'm not talking about that. It means citizens must evaluate the evidence very carefully, because ultimately this story is larger than one administration. It's very clear. It is larger than one president. It is larger than one political party itself. At its core, this is a debate about governance itself. How much should power be concentrated in the executive branch, and how much transparency should exist during national security crisis? It's very important too. And how many voices should participate before decisions involving military forces are made for any military operation? These are questions that transcend elections. They go directly to the heart of constitutional government, and perhaps that is why the book has generated so much attention. Not because it merely describes internal White House drama, no, not because of that, but because it challenges a basic assumption many normal Americans, they hold. Now, the assumption that major decisions are always the product of broad institutional consultation. The authors argue otherwise. They describe a system where a very small circle exercises extraordinary influence, whether readers ultimately accept that conclusion or reject it. And the question raised by the books are likely to remain. So who really advises a president here? Who gains the access when the history is being made? Who gets excluded from these meetings? And when the most important decisions are taken, how many people are actually in the room to take that decision? The answer to those questions may reveal far more about power in Washington than any official recognized chart ever could. Now, if the authors are correct, the most powerful office in the world may have been operating in a far smaller circle influence than the most Americans ever imagined in their life. So that is the controversy. That is the debate right here. And that is why this book is making headlines across the political world. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think, how it is run, and with this breakdown and analysis, let me know, what do you think? And for more and more insights and breakdown, please subscribe and stay tuned and help the channel to grow more and more. Thank you. See you in the next video.